You made it. Another night, another quiet moment to slip beneath the noise. You settle into the darkness, and somewhere in the back of your mind, ancient waters begin to stir. Imagine for a moment that you're standing at the edge of a vast ocean, but this isn't any ordinary sea, this is the memory of water that once covered everything you know. The ground beneath your feet holds secrets, layers of sediment that whisper of a time when the world drowned, when civilizations vanished beneath waves that rose higher than mountains. Your breath slows as you consider this. 12,000 years ago, something happened. Something so catastrophic that it carved itself into the collective memory of every culture on Earth. Let's be honest. You probably won't make it to the end. Sleep always wins. But tonight, as your eyelids grow heavy, let these ancient waters carry you through a story that's been waiting in the depths of human consciousness, a story that challenges everything you thought you knew about the past. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if this kind of quiet weirdness feels like home. Then, if you're still here, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you? Now, soften the lights, maybe turn on a fan or let a candle flicker somewhere nearby, and let's begin. You drift now into the realm where science meets mystery, where the rational mind encounters something that doesn't quite fit the neat categories we've built around our understanding of history. Your breathing deepens as you consider the strange unanimity of flood stories across the globe. From the Epic of Gilgamesh in ancient Mesopotamia to the biblical account of Noah, from Hindu texts describing Manu's ark to Aboriginal Dreamtime stories of great waters, from Aztec legends of Tlaloc's deluge to Greek myths of Deucalion's flood, every corner of human civilization carries this same haunting memory. It's as if the entire species experienced a collective trauma so profound that it became embedded in our DNA, passed down through generations like a genetic echo of catastrophe. You begin to sense something unsettling in this pattern. Traditional archaeology suggests these stories are mere myths, symbolic tales created to explain natural phenomena or teach moral lessons. But what if there's something else entirely? What if they're fragmented memories of an actual event, distorted by time but preserving the essential truth of a global catastrophe that reshaped the world? Your mind wanders through the implications as sleep tugs at the edges of your consciousness. The mainstream view holds that the last ice age ended gradually, with sea levels rising slowly over millennia as glaciers melted. But there's another story emerging from the shadows of scientific inquiry, one that suggests the transition wasn't gradual at all. You find yourself floating through layers of geological evidence that paint a different picture entirely. Your awareness drifts across vast landscapes scarred by something violent and sudden. The channeled scablands of Washington state stretch before you in your mind's eye, a terrain so bizarre that early geologists refused to believe what they were seeing. These massive channels, carved deep into basalt bedrock, tell the story of water moving with unimaginable force. For decades, the scientific establishment dismissed the idea that these formations could have been created by catastrophic flooding. The prevailing doctrine of uniformitarianism, the belief that geological processes occur slowly and steadily over vast periods, couldn't accommodate the evidence of sudden, violent change. But you sense the truth in the landscape itself. The Missoula floods, as they came to be known, weren't gentle processes. They were cataclysmic events that moved water at speeds and volumes that beggar imagination. Ice dams the size of skyscrapers burst repeatedly, releasing floods that carved the Columbia River gorge and sculpted the Pacific Northwest into its current form. Your breathing slows as you contemplate the scale of these events. Water moving at 60 miles per hour, carrying boulders the size of houses, stripping away hundreds of feet of soil and rock in a matter of days. This wasn't the gradual melting of ice sheets, this was something far more dramatic and sudden. You drift deeper into the mystery, your consciousness floating through the work of researchers who've spent their lives piecing together evidence of global catastrophe. The name Randall Carlson whispers through your awareness like water over stone. Here's a man who's dedicated decades to understanding the geological evidence for sudden climate change, who's traced the fingerprints of cosmic impact across the North American landscape. Your mind follows his research into the Younger Dryas period, that strange thousand-year return to Ice Age conditions that began exactly 12,900 years ago. Something happened at that moment in time, something that plunged the world back into glacial cold just as it was emerging from the last ice age. The mainstream explanation involves changes in ocean circulation, a gradual shift in the Atlantic's thermohaline circulation that cooled the northern hemisphere. But Carlson and his colleagues have found evidence of something far more dramatic, the signature of cosmic impact, the residue of extraterrestrial objects that struck the Earth with enough force to trigger global catastrophe. You sense the controversy surrounding this idea, the way it challenges fundamental assumptions about the stability of our world. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis suggests that a swarm of cosmic debris, perhaps fragments of a disintegrating comet, struck the Earth around 12,900 years ago. The impact would have triggered massive wildfires, created a nuclear winter effect, and caused the rapid melting of ice sheets, leading to catastrophic flooding across the globe. Your awareness drifts through the evidence like smoke through ancient ruins. Nanodiamonds scattered across multiple continents, formed only under the extreme pressures of cosmic impact. Spirals of melted rock, blast debris that can only be created by extraterrestrial collision. Layers of charcoal and soot that speak of continent-wide fires. The extinction of North American megafauna, mammoths, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, all disappearing at exactly the same time as this proposed impact event. You begin to see the connections forming in your drowsy mind, the way this catastrophe theory weaves together disparate threads of evidence into a coherent narrative. The impact doesn't just explain the geological evidence, it provides a mechanism for the global flood stories that haunt human memory. Imagine the scene, cosmic debris raining down from the sky, triggering massive fires that darken the sun, causing rapid climate change that destabilizes ice sheets and sends walls of water racing across continents. Coastal civilizations would have been obliterated in a matter of days or weeks. The survivors, traumatized and displaced, would have carried the memory of this catastrophe with them as they rebuilt their shattered world. But here's where the story takes an even stranger turn, where the rational mind encounters something that doesn't quite fit conventional understanding. Some researchers suggest that this wasn't just a random cosmic accident, that the timing of the impact coincides too perfectly with other mysterious phenomena to be mere coincidence. You float now through the work of Graham Hancock, that controversial figure who straddles the line between mainstream archaeology and fringe speculation. Your consciousness follows his investigations into the possibility that advanced civilizations existed before the catastrophe, sophisticated cultures that were wiped out by the global flood and whose survivors became the source of civilization-building knowledge that suddenly appeared in places like ancient Sumer and Egypt. The mainstream archaeological community dismisses Hancock's ideas as pseudoscience, arguing that there's no evidence for advanced prehistoric civilizations. But you sense something intriguing in his approach, the way he connects dots that others refuse to see. The sudden appearance of complex astronomical knowledge in ancient cultures, the precision of megalithic constructions that seem to require advanced engineering capabilities, the sophisticated understanding of precession and celestial cycles that appears fully formed in the earliest historical records. What if these weren't gradual developments but the preserved remnants of knowledge from a lost civilization? Your mind drifts through the implications as sleep pulls you deeper. The idea that human civilization is far older than we've been taught, that the catastrophe of 12,900 years ago represents not the end of the Ice Age but the end of a previous chapter in human development. It's a tantalizing possibility that challenges everything we think we know about our own history. But it's also deeply controversial, rejected by mainstream academia as lacking sufficient evidence. You find yourself suspended between these competing narratives, neither fully accepting nor rejecting either possibility. Your awareness floats through the psychological implications of these ideas, the way they resonate with something deep in the human psyche. Carl Jung would have recognized the archetypal power of the flood narrative, the way it speaks to fundamental fears and hopes embedded in the collective unconscious. The flood represents both destruction and renewal, the end of one world and the beginning of another. It's the ultimate reset button, wiping the slate clean so that life can begin again. You sense how this archetype manifests in modern consciousness through apocalyptic anxieties and post-apocalyptic fantasies. The popularity of disaster movies, the fascination with end-time scenarios, the way climate change discussions often take on the tone of flood mythology, all of these might be expressions of this ancient trauma still echoing in our collective memory. But there's something else here too, something that touches on the spiritual dimensions of catastrophe and renewal. Many mystical traditions speak of cyclical time, of great ages that rise and fall in endless succession. The Hindu concept of yugas, the Mayan long count calendar, the Hopi prophecies of world renewal, all suggest that catastrophic change isn't an aberration but a fundamental feature of cosmic order. Your breathing deepens as you consider this possibility, that the flood evidence isn't just about a single historical event but about a pattern that repeats throughout time. Perhaps consciousness itself evolves through these cycles of destruction and creation, with each catastrophe serving as a catalyst for new forms of awareness to emerge. You drift now into even stranger territory, where the flood evidence intersects with ideas about consciousness and reality that push the boundaries of conventional understanding. Some researchers have suggested that the cosmic impact that triggered the Younger Dryas wasn't just a physical event but a consciousness-altering one as well. The electromagnetic effects of such an impact, they argue, could have influenced human brain function in ways that fundamentally changed how our ancestors perceived reality. This is where the story becomes truly speculative, venturing into realms that mainstream science barely acknowledges. The idea that cosmic events can trigger evolutionary leaps in consciousness, that catastrophe serves as a catalyst for new forms of awareness to emerge. You sense the appeal of this notion, the way it transforms disaster into opportunity, destruction into transformation. But you also recognize the danger of such thinking, the way it can be used to justify suffering or to avoid dealing with the practical implications of real catastrophe. Your mind floats between these possibilities like a dreamer navigating between different levels of sleep. The rational part of you recognizes that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that much of what you're contemplating exists at the margins of scientific respectability. But another part of you, the part that's always been drawn to mystery and wonder, finds something compelling in these ideas. What if reality is far stranger and more fluid than we've been taught? What if consciousness and cosmos are more intimately connected than materialist science allows? Your awareness drifts through the work of researchers like Paul Laviolette, who spent decades investigating connections between galactic phenomena and terrestrial catastrophe. His research into galactic superwaves, periodic bursts of cosmic radiation from the galactic center, suggests that our solar system regularly encounters conditions that could trigger dramatic climate change and evolutionary pressure. The idea that we're not isolated in space but intimately connected to galactic processes that unfold over vast time scales. You find yourself contemplating the implications as your consciousness grows heavy with approaching sleep. If Laviolette is correct, then the catastrophe of 12,900 years ago might not have been an isolated event but part of a larger pattern of cosmic influence on terrestrial evolution. The flood stories might be memories not just of one catastrophe but of multiple events spread across deep time, each one serving as a punctuation mark in the ongoing story of consciousness evolution. But here again you encounter the tension between speculation and evidence, between the desire for grand unified theories and the messy complexity of actual research. Laviolette's ideas, while intriguing, remain controversial within the scientific community. The evidence for galactic superwaves affecting Earth's climate is suggestive but not conclusive. You sense how easy it would be to get lost in these speculative realms, to mistake possibility for probability, to confuse what we want to be true with what the evidence actually supports. You float deeper into the mystery, your consciousness drifting through the work of researchers who found evidence of advanced astronomical knowledge in prehistoric sites around the world. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, with its massive stone pillars arranged in precise astronomical alignments, dated to over 11,000 years ago, right after the proposed catastrophe. The site challenges conventional understanding of prehistoric capabilities, suggesting that complex civilization emerged much earlier than previously thought. Your mind wanders through the implications as sleep tugs at your awareness. What if Göbekli Tepe isn't the beginning of civilization but a remnant of something that came before? What if the astronomical knowledge encoded in its stone circles represents the preserved wisdom of survivors from the pre-catastrophe world? The mainstream archaeological interpretation focuses on the site's religious significance, viewing it as evidence for the role of ritual and belief in early social organization. But you sense something else in the precision of its alignments, the sophistication of its construction, the way it seems to emerge fully formed without obvious predecessors. It's as if the builders possessed knowledge that shouldn't have existed at that time in human development. Similar mysteries appear around the world, the precision of Stonehenge's astronomical alignments, the mathematical sophistication of the Antikythera mechanism, the advanced metallurgy of ancient Andean cultures. Each discovery pushes back the timeline of human technological capability, suggesting that our ancestors were far more sophisticated than we've given them credit for. Your breathing slows as you contemplate the psychological resistance to these ideas, the way they challenge fundamental assumptions about progress and development. The linear narrative of human advancement, from primitive hunter-gatherers to complex civilizations, is deeply embedded in our cultural consciousness. It provides a comforting sense of trajectory, of movement toward ever greater sophistication and understanding. But what if this narrative is wrong? What if human development has been cyclical rather than linear, with periods of advancement followed by collapse and renewal? The flood evidence suggests exactly this kind of cyclical pattern, with advanced civilizations rising and falling in response to cosmic and terrestrial catastrophes. Your mind drifts through the implications for our current moment in history. If the pattern holds, then our own technological civilization might be more fragile than we imagine, more vulnerable to the kinds of cosmic events that have shaped human development throughout deep time. The idea is both humbling and terrifying, suggesting that all our achievements could be swept away by forces beyond our control. But it's also strangely liberating, freeing us from the burden of believing that we represent the pinnacle of human development. Perhaps we're just one iteration in an ongoing cycle of rise and fall, destruction and renewal. Perhaps the flood stories aren't just about the past but about the future as well, warnings encoded in myth to help us navigate the challenges that lie ahead. You drift now through the strangest territory of all, where the flood evidence intersects with ideas about consciousness that push far beyond the boundaries of conventional understanding. Some researchers have suggested that the catastrophe of 12,900 years ago wasn't just a physical event but a consciousness event as well, a moment when human awareness underwent a fundamental transformation. The electromagnetic effects of cosmic impact, they argue, could have influenced brain function in ways that altered perception, cognition, and even the structure of consciousness itself. This is where the story ventures into truly speculative territory, touching on ideas that most scientists would dismiss as fantasy. The notion that cosmic events can trigger evolutionary leaps in consciousness, that catastrophe serves as a catalyst for new forms of awareness to emerge. You sense both the appeal and the danger of such thinking, the way it can transform disaster into opportunity while potentially minimizing the real suffering that catastrophe entails. Your consciousness floats between skepticism and wonder as you consider these possibilities. What if the survivors of the Great Flood weren't just physically different from their predecessors but psychologically different as well? What if the catastrophe served as a kind of initiation, forcing human consciousness to evolve new capacities for survival and adaptation? The idea resonates with shamanic traditions that speak of consciousness transformation through ordeal, of wisdom gained through confrontation with death and dissolution. But it also raises uncomfortable questions about the relationship between suffering and growth, between catastrophe and evolution. Your awareness drifts through the work of consciousness researchers who've explored the connections between trauma and transcendence, between catastrophic experience and expanded awareness. The psychological literature is full of accounts of individuals who've undergone profound transformation following traumatic events, near-death experiences that fundamentally alter worldview, catastrophic illnesses that trigger spiritual awakening, natural disasters that catalyze new forms of community and cooperation. What if the global catastrophe of 12,900 years ago served a similar function for human consciousness as a whole? What if it forced our species to develop new capacities for cooperation, innovation, and spiritual understanding? Your mind floats through the implications as sleep pulls you deeper into mystery. The idea that consciousness evolution might require catastrophic pressure, that new forms of awareness emerge only when old forms are no longer adequate to the challenges at hand. It's a disturbing notion that challenges comfortable assumptions about progress and development, suggesting that growth might require destruction, that transcendence might demand dissolution. But you also sense something profound in this possibility, something that speaks to the deepest mysteries of existence itself. The way consciousness seems to emerge from chaos, the way meaning arises from meaninglessness, the way life persists despite, or perhaps because of, the constant threat of death and dissolution. You float now through the final implications of the flood evidence, the way it challenges not just our understanding of history but our assumptions about reality itself. If the catastrophe theories are correct, then the world is far less stable than we've been taught to believe. The comfortable notion of gradual change, of slow and steady progress, gives way to a more chaotic vision of sudden transformation and cyclical renewal. Your consciousness drifts through the psychological implications of this shift in perspective. How does it change the way you live when you recognize that everything you take for granted could be swept away in an instant? How does it alter your priorities when you realize that human civilization is just one brief moment in a vast cycle of cosmic change? Some find this recognition terrifying, a source of anxiety and despair that undermines the foundations of meaning and purpose. Others find it liberating, a reminder that attachment to temporary forms leads only to suffering, that true peace comes from recognizing the impermanent nature of all phenomena. Your breathing deepens as you sense the spiritual dimensions of this understanding. The flood evidence doesn't just challenge scientific orthodoxy, it challenges the entire materialist worldview that dominates modern consciousness. If reality is as fluid and unpredictable as the evidence suggests, then perhaps consciousness itself is more fundamental than we've been taught to believe. Perhaps the universe is more like a dream than a machine, more responsive to awareness than determined by mechanical laws. Your awareness drifts through the mystery of memory itself, the way the flood stories have persisted across cultures and millennia despite the lack of written records from the time of the catastrophe. How does collective memory work? How do traumatic experiences become embedded in cultural consciousness and passed down through generations? The conventional explanation focuses on oral tradition, the way stories are transmitted from parent to child across the generations. But some researchers have suggested more exotic possibilities: genetic memory, morphic resonance, collective unconscious processes that operate below the threshold of ordinary awareness. Your mind floats through these speculative territories as sleep tugs at the edges of consciousness. What if memory isn't just individual but collective, not just personal but species-wide? What if the flood stories represent a form of ancestral wisdom, encoded in myth and symbol to help future generations navigate similar challenges? The idea resonates with indigenous traditions that speak of ancestral knowledge, of wisdom that comes not through learning but through remembering, through reconnecting with sources of understanding that exist beyond individual consciousness. But it also challenges materialist assumptions about the nature of memory and information, suggesting that consciousness might be more interconnected than we've been taught to believe. Perhaps the boundaries between self and other, between individual and collective, are less solid than they appear. Perhaps the flood stories live not just in cultural memory but in the deeper structures of consciousness itself. Your consciousness drifts now through the implications for our current moment in history, the way the flood evidence speaks to contemporary concerns about climate change, cosmic threats, and civilizational fragility. The parallels are impossible to ignore: rising sea levels, extreme weather events, the growing recognition that human civilization exists within natural systems that could shift dramatically without warning. Your awareness floats through the psychological dimensions of this recognition, the way apocalyptic anxieties manifest in popular culture and political discourse. The flood archetype lives on in climate change narratives, in discussions of tipping points and irreversible change, in the growing sense that we might be approaching another moment of catastrophic transformation. But you also sense the danger of apocalyptic thinking, the way it can become a form of psychological defense against the complexity of real challenges. It's easier to imagine total catastrophe than to grapple with the messy work of adaptation and mitigation. It's more dramatic to envision the end of the world than to engage with the slow, difficult process of building resilience and sustainability. Your mind drifts between these perspectives as sleep pulls you deeper into mystery. Perhaps the flood evidence offers not just a warning but a source of hope, a reminder that consciousness has survived catastrophic change before and can do so again. Perhaps the stories of renewal that follow the flood narratives are as important as the stories of destruction that precede them. You float through the final mystery, the way the flood evidence points toward questions that science alone cannot answer. What is the relationship between consciousness and cosmos? How do meaning and purpose emerge from chaos and catastrophe? Why do the flood stories speak to something so deep in human experience that they've persisted across cultures and millennia? Your awareness drifts through these ultimate questions as your breathing slows and deepens. Perhaps the flood evidence is less important for what it tells us about the past than for what it reveals about the nature of existence itself. The way reality seems to unfold through cycles of creation and destruction, the way consciousness emerges from and returns to mystery, the way meaning persists despite the constant threat of meaninglessness. You sense that you're approaching the edge of what can be known through rational inquiry, the boundary where science gives way to philosophy, where evidence gives way to faith, where knowledge gives way to wisdom. The flood stories live in this liminal space, neither purely factual nor purely fictional, but something more complex and mysterious than either category allows. They speak to the part of human consciousness that recognizes truth not through proof but through resonance, that finds meaning not through explanation but through participation in mystery itself. Your consciousness grows heavy now, pulled toward the depths of sleep where rational categories dissolve and deeper forms of knowing emerge. The flood waters that once covered the earth now flow through your dreams, carrying you toward understanding that exists beyond the reach of waking thought. You don't need to solve the mystery of the Great Flood to be transformed by it. You don't need to prove the catastrophe theories to be changed by their implications. Sometimes the most important truths are the ones that can't be grasped directly, that can only be approached through story and symbol, through myth and metaphor, through the kind of knowing that emerges in the space between sleeping and waking. The ancient waters still flow through human consciousness, carrying the memory of catastrophe and renewal, of destruction and rebirth, of the way consciousness persists through even the greatest challenges. You don't need to understand it all. Just rest. Let the unseen carry you the rest of the way.